Alegrías are nowadays one of the most popular songs, dances, and guitar playing in flamenco recitals and concerts. But did you know since when they are known by that name? In episode 38 of the podcast Forgotten Sounds of Flamenco, we will discuss about the early days of Alegrías and listen to some musical samples of all Alegrías and some music that could have been related to them.
Sounds that once were listened. Sounds that once were enjoyed. Sounds that once were danced. Sounds relegated to oblivion. And yet, there is still something we can do for them. Let us summon them. Let us summon them.
Welcome to the podcast Forgotten Sounds of Flamenco. My name is José Miguel Hernández Jaramillo, and I invite you to enroll in this journey through the sounds, stories, spaces, and people that were part of the 19th century flamenco.
Thank you very much for listening to this podcast episode, Forgotten Sounds of Flamenco. I want to start by saying that a few days ago, I received an unfortunate but, at the same time, very inspiring message that makes all the effort I put into producing this podcast and offering it for free make sense and make it worthwhile. Marina, the daughter of a faithful follower of this podcast who had just left us, wrote to me and told me how, in his last days, in addition to the company of his family, he was accompanied by the sounds of the episodes of this podcast. It was a message that moved me deeply, so I want to dedicate this episode as a tribute to Don Felipe Agudo Montes, a doctor from Chiclana throughout his life and a great lover of flamenco, whom I never got to know personally. Still, the messages and displays of affection from people close to me show me the great person he was and everything he did for others. From here, I send a big hug to his wife and all his children. I had another topic prepared to dedicate this episode to. Still, I have decided to change it and talk about Alegrías de Cádiz, Don Felipe's favorite song. I hope you like it and enjoy it wherever you listen to us. The Alegrías is a song usually associated with the area of Cádiz and that is still sung today in flamenco. As for the Alegrías, I will not comment on possible elements that could have intervened in its formation because it is a subject that I have not investigated in depth. I want to locate chronologically when these songs began to be called Alegrías, but, above all, I want to share music related to this song that is practically unknown today. Everything indicates that it was at the end of the 1870s, just when flamenco began to become one of the favorite music of the Spanish public. In September 1879, Alegrías with such a name already appeared in Madrid. I will read you a newspaper article where the author highlights how flamenco singing is beginning to gain popularity in Madrid. The people who daily attend the old Circo de Pal, then called Teatro de la Bolsa, have revived it after it was on the verge of closing. In this text, you will also see the elite's rejection of flamenco during this period, especially in Madrid. The article says the following. The old and uncomfortable Circo de Pal, which has had so many names since then, lives, prospers, and flourishes. And not because of the merit of the actors who form the company, not because of the grace of the pieces they premiere, but because of the flamenco singers who participate in the performances. See something from that musical menu. Solia sung by the Pastora, Alegría, sung by Ana and danced by Antonia La Rotena and the Male, Malagueñas, sung by the acclaimed tenor Juan Bravo, Guajiros, sung and danced by Juan Patron Lopez, the New American Tango, sung and danced by the Girl from Male. This program does not change or vary except in form. However, a large audience, I dare not say select, fights for seats daily, applauds and repeats that monotonous song whose only orchestra is the clapping noise. Well, there are the Alegrías announced between Solias, Malagueñas, Guajiros or tangos, also in a program that had the leading figures of the moment such as Juan Patron, nicknamed El Guajiro, of whom I already spoke in episode 5 as one of the promoters of Guajiros singing in Spain, or Juan Bravo himself, who was perhaps the most recognized flamenco singer in Madrid at that time and to whom I will soon also dedicate an episode of this podcast. 3 weeks later, on October 8, 1879, a concert was announced at the Circo de Pal, also called the Teatro de La Bolsa in Madrid, where up to 4 different alegrías were danced by 4 female dancers. Alegría danced by Carmen Montina, Antonia Pacheco La Rotena, Trinidad Cuenca and Maria de la Hera, Loca de Mateos. It was also announced that the flamenco guitarist Francisco Diaz El de Lucena would perform guitar solos, so we see how the flamenco concert guitar had its place on stage already at that time, and not from the generation of Ramon Montoya 30 years later as we saw in episode 36. Well, some of these 4 female dancers, as well as the guitarist, had been directly hired by this theater and had just arrived from Andalusia a few days before, given the tremendous success that the flamenco numbers were having in that theater at that time. A couple of years later, in 1881, Antonio Machado Alvarez Demofilo already mentions the alegrías in his book Colección de Cantos Flamencos, collection of flamenco songs, and describes it as a common song in the cafés cantantes of his time, and mentions that some singers do consider the alegrías as another flamenco song. Demofilo prefers not to include them within this category of flamenco song but rather considers them an Andalusian song. To all these particular songs, which together receive the common name of flamenco singing, some singers add a series of tonallas called alegrías and juguetillos, which, in their opinion, not ours, should also be included under that common denomination. However, we disregard this respectable opinion because no one knows things better than the one who handles them. We do not want to include more than the compositions mentioned in this collection since alegrías are more typical of the Andalusian character than of the gypsy. The truth is that it is difficult to be sure how these alegrías from almost a century and a half ago could sound because, unlike other flamenco songs for which abundant musical documentation has been preserved from that period, Alegrías was not a song that was included in zarzuelas or other types of stage works, nor do scores appear in compilations of flamenco songs or national airs until well into the 20th century. We will listen to some panaderos composed by a woman, Enriqueta Ventura de Domenech, and published in Seville around 1880, which have a slightly different sound than previous panaderos. The succession of variations of these panaderos sounds like the guitar playing of the alegrías. Let's listen to this piece. The truth is that, as I mentioned before, due to the very scarce musical documentation that has reached us of the alegrías, any interpretation of the relationship between the panaderos and the alegrías could be very risky. However, what is undeniable is that what Enriqueta Ventura left reflected on paper as panaderos is what we flamenco guitarists play today as alegrías. As we saw in episode 32, the panaderos was another of the songs that probably came from Mexico. Can you imagine that the music of the bakers contributed in some way to the formation of another flamenco style? The alegrías, as we saw in the previous episode, that could have happened with the Mexican PTNeras and the Soleá? We will listen to one of the first scores of alegrías that reached us, dated in 1911 and composed by Modesto and Vicente Romero. want to close this episode by listening to other alegrías, savoring an exquisite piece composed by my countryman Manuel Fontanta, which he called Alegrías de la Turbana. I already talked about it in episode 33. It is a piece that fascinates me. We are going to listen to just a fragment of it. Well, I hope you liked this episode that I wanted to dedicate with all my love to Don Felipe Agudo Montes, whom this podcast was able to entertain and cheer up, even in tough times. In the studio with a microphone, we don't realize everything is happening through these sounds and the thousands of people who listen to it. I hope you liked this episode, that you shared it with other people who might also like it, and that you subscribe to some of the platforms where we broadcast it. Thank you very much for being there. In a couple of Fridays, we will continue with new stories about the flamenco that our great-great-grandparents enjoyed.